Hi there. I'm so excited to welcome you to the Arthritis Life podcast, where we share arthritis life stories and tips for thriving with autoimmune arthritis. My name is Cheryl Crow, and I am passionate about helping people navigate real life with arthritis beyond joint pain. I've been living with rheumatoid arthritis for 20 years, and I'm also a mom, occupational therapist, video creator, support group leader, and I created the Room to Thrive self-management program. I am so excited to help you live a more empowered life with arthritis. We're going to cover everything from kitchen life hacks to navigating the healthcare system to coping with friends who just don't get it. Seriously, no topic is going to be off limits on this podcast. My interviewees and I share our honest stories of how chronic illness affects our lives. This includes discussions about mental health, sex, shame, pregnancy, body image, advocacy, self-acceptance, and so much more. You'll hear stories from all ends of the spectrum, from a person who's living in medicated remission from psoriatic arthritis to somebody living with severe mobility restrictions and severe pain from rheumatoid arthritis. You'll hear how people manage their conditions in different ways, like medications, mindfulness, movement, social support, work accommodations, and so much more. You'll also hear from rheumatology experts who just get it. We'll dive deep into the science behind chronic pain and what's the latest evidence for lifestyle changes that can help you thrive with arthritis, including exercise, sleep, nutrition, stress reduction, and more. This is your chance to sit down and chat with a friend who's been there. Ready to figure out how to manage your arthritis life? Let's get started.
Welcome to Rheumer Has It, the podcast that busts myths, highlights evidence, and inspires hope for living better with rheumatic disease.
Through plain language interviews with experts, we offer actual knowledge so you can thrive today.
My name is Eileen.
And my name is Cheryl.
Join us as we bust myths and spotlight evidence. All right, so today we're very happy to have somebody that is from the same area as me, Vancouver, British Columbia. And I would say the first researcher that I ever partnered with involving as a patient partner. We have Dr. Linda Lee, who is from Arthritis Research Canada and a UBC professor with physiotherapy. And I picked her today to talk about what patients should know about high quality arthritis research and debunking some myths and misconceptions that kind of come around a lot of things that you'll understand when we get into it, but why people may think a research study is good, but it might actually not be that great. And I decided to ask Dr. Linda Lee because, first of all, I've been working with her for about 8 years now, if not more, involved in her own studies, even being a patient who has spoken to her students for physiotherapy. But also, I was involved in the 2023 Integrated Treatment Guidelines for Rheumatoid Arthritis put out by the American College of Rheumatology. And Dr. Linda Lee was one of the researchers or people that were able to read all of the massive amount of literature review that they had to go through to pick out what the actual panel would kind of sift through and come up with what these guidelines were. And they were so very evidence-driven. So that is why I've asked Dr. Lee here, because I think she is the best person to talk about what is a good research study and how can we help patients understand how they can find one and find a bad one. So Dr. Lee, I'm very excited to have you here.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you for having me.
Yay!
So-
We're so happy to have you. And just to dovetail on what Eileen said, the reason this is so particularly important to me as well is that, especially in the last 5 years since I started doing this work of patient education on social media and on podcasts and in YouTube and everywhere else, is that I've really seen an erosion of public trust in public health and a lot of anti-science sentiment online. And it's really concerning to me as a patient, because a lot of times people have maybe a good intention to do their own research, and we definitely benefit from learning about our conditions, but we have to find a way to ensure that we're not just falling into some pitfalls or traps of like cherry picking data or thinking that we're following someone evidence-based who's really a snake oil salesman in disguise. So that's my personal connection to this. But yeah, let's go to you. Can you let us, Dr. Lee, know a little bit more about your training and experience with arthritis research? If you have ever felt completely lost or utterly alone while trying to navigate real life with rheumatic disease, listen up. I am here for you. I created an educational program to help you go from overwhelmed to confident, supported, and connected in a matter of weeks. And it's called Room to Thrive. After earning a master's in occupational therapy and completing hundreds of hours of additional training, I created a step-by-step guide to help you truly thrive with rheumatic disease. This is the only program I know of that's designed to improve quality of life for people living with inflammatory, autoimmune forms of arthritis, like rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis, Sjogren's disease, and more. During the self-paced lessons, you'll learn how to manage pain and fatigue, cope with stress, navigate relationships, and continue doing the things that matter to you and bring you joy. The goal is really to help you improve your quality of life and learn how to thrive with your rheumatic disease right now, rather than waiting for a distant day when it might be cured or healed. I really created the down-to-earth, practical, heartfelt resource I wish I had had when I was first diagnosed at age 20. If you want even more in-depth support, you can join the 12-week Room to Thrive virtual support group, where you'll be surrounded by people who actually get what you're going through, people who will provide the encouragement, validation, and support that you deserve. Each group is expertly moderated, so you don't have to worry about the kind of misinformation that spreads like wildfire in the free-for-all social media groups. If you're on the fence, don't just take my word for it. Here's what Katie had to say in March 2023. I was lost and overwhelmed with my RA diagnosis. It felt overwhelming to know what to read, what to do, how to spend my energy trying to research on the internet. Room to Thrive did that for me. It's been like getting a crash course in my diagnosis along with a community who gets it. To see all the details, including the dates for the next support groups, go to the link in the show notes or bit.ly/thriveroom with a capital T and capital R. You can also just email me anytime at info@myarthritislife.net. And don't delay if you're interested, because each group is capped at 16 people or less in order to make a small, intimate group atmosphere. Thanks so much for your time, and I can't wait to get started with the next groups. And I can't wait for those of you who are interested in the self-paced option to go ahead and join that at any time. Bye-bye for now.
Yeah, sure. So I am a physiotherapist by background. The work that we do involves a lot on exercise for people with arthritis, physical activity, and what are the better ways to help to self-manage the condition. And I am also an implementation scientist. So what we do is really trying to find ways to get the best evidence that we know about arthritis treatment, for example, into the hands of people living with the condition as well as the care provider, so that they can work better together. So having good evidence and knowing how to look for good evidence is really important, and that's a passion of my work.
Well, it's perfect to have you here today then. So the first question is that a lot of our listeners, they really want to learn more about arthritis research, but they aren't sure where to start. So what do you think are some of the most important things for patients to know in terms of how to find and understand reputable research?
Yeah, oftentimes the quickest source of information for people, especially with technology, with social media, people would tend to go to places that they can easily find information. But oftentimes, the information may or may not be based on science, or it may not be accurate. So there are websites available that we know from reputable sources, such as Arthritis Foundation in the United States, as well as Arthritis Research Canada, which is the organization where we conduct a lot of research in this area, and also from your healthcare provider. Like, those are the sources of information or places where you can get good, reliable information. Like you said, Cheryl, a lot of individuals will want to do their own homework and find out what are some of the ways that they can help themselves with, and also wanting to have a better conversation with their healthcare provider. Like people are encouraged to take charge of your health, do your own homework. So people are following their recommendation. And oftentimes there's some of the things that people would do is to look at what is online, what's on social media. But it is really important for people to know how to identify information that are reputable in order to be a better partner with their healthcare provider, as well as make better decisions about their own health care.
Yeah, and I would just add to that that a lot of these reputable sources like the Research Foundation and stuff like that, they'll provide source citations for the evidence. So a lot of times on social media, people will say, "Oh, well, I helped this person because I did X, Y, Z, and they felt better," but there's no citation to any external, like, unbiased research on that. And one of the things people might have heard a lot of times before is peer-reviewed research. What does that actually mean? Can you let our audience know what peer review is and why that's important?
That's a really good question. So when researchers finish doing their work, publish their results, what we usually do is you prepare your paper, your manuscript, and you want to have other individuals who are also understanding the area and the methods that you're doing the research to look at what's being written, how the study is being done, and provide constructive feedback so that you can further improve this paper. So so that's how peer review journal works. Typically, they will, once they receive a submission from research teams, they will then independently select people who are in the field or have knowledge about the methods that's being used, and they'll ask them to provide feedback on the paper. Those processes oftentimes are blinded, meaning that the authors don't know who the reviewers are. So it gives the reviewers confidence in giving feedback without worrying about repercussion or anything like that. And then those journals will take the reviewers' feedback and decide whether send it back to the authors so that they can do some improvements, or if the what's being written is not up to scientific standard, the editorial board may decide to reject the article. In this very small number of cases, paper may just go through after the first review because they're so perfect. Doesn't happen often. Usually people will get feedback from the peer reviewers to improve the papers. So that's a bit of it. So then once the paper is improved, reviewers will look at it again, and that's a bit of an iterative process to make sure that what the journal is going to be publishing is in the best scientific quality and it is scientifically sound. So that's why the peer review process is so important. And that's why peer review scientific literature is being held as a higher standard publication in terms of sharing research knowledge.
I want to circle a little bit around that, knowing that they have a number at the board. And these are brilliant people, researchers, science. And I've been in the room with many researchers, and when you go through the process of picking apart studies and whatnot, a lot of it goes over my head. I will be perfectly honest. There's a lot of research jargon, medical jargon, depending on who's there. If it's a data analyst, then I'm really not going to understand it. But say if there's somebody who wants to understand what research is going on, but necessarily is uncomfortable with understanding, say, a full abstract that they find in arthritis research and care, can you walk us through what a plain language summary is so that the people that maybe are a little intimidated by the scientific jargon can understand that they can look for something that is actually meant so that it's applicable to everyone?
Yeah, scientific research oftentimes is being seen as this big mysterious thing that it has jargons, it has acronyms, it has language that is so hard for people who are not in the field. to understand it. And sometimes it's not just for people who are not researchers, but even for myself, as an implantation scientist, as a health services researcher, when I look at an article that is done in biological research or in a research lab that is not in my area, some of the acronyms I may not understand either. But at the same time, myself and many other people will have you can understand how a research question is being asked. What are the general methods that was used to address the question? What are the results? And what are the implications? What are the conclusion, right? People can understand in general. So there's this movement that encouraging better science communication. And I think kudos to you, Eileen and Cheryl as well, that you've done so much in helping to encourage researchers to use language and really intentional and be thoughtful in a way that explaining what they do, what question they're asking, how did they do it, what did they find, and what are the conclusion. So that is really the backbone of plain language summary. Basically, avoid using language that is very specific to the field, that avoid using acronyms, especially the ones that are not defined. Only a small group of people will know what they mean, so don't use those acronyms. And really explaining in the way that people can relate to. I'm really pleased to see that some of the journals actually mandate researchers to provide a plain language summary so that not only individuals who have knowledge and expertise can understand what's being done, everybody or people who are not in the field can have access to those information and understand what's in there as well. So that's a story of plain language summary.
Yeah, they're so important. And one thing I love about being on the Arthritis Research Canada Patient Advisory Board is that they have actual patients writing those plain language summaries
Yeah.
so that other patients can understand it. And that is actually starting to pick up a little bit more for some other editorial places I've noticed too. And that's great because us patients really speak a certain language to each other, and it could make things a little bit easier to understand. So yeah, thank you for walking us through plain language summaries. And for those who are listening and want to get into reading about research, but a little intimidated, look for those plain language summaries. However,
I think one thing that we actually benefit so much is that as we're training the next generation of researchers, oftentimes we make it as part of the training that we work with students to develop plain language summary and work with patient partners like Cheryl, like Eileen, who refine the language and how you describe things and how do you structure a plain language summary. So again, I think I thank you for the work that both of you are doing in not only communicating science or helping us to communicate science, but also help us and the next generation to be better scientists and better communicators.
well, yeah, I'll just put in a little fun fact. Arthritis Research Canada was the first research institute to have a patient advisory board. So they have been leading the way with involving patients in their research and including plain language summaries. So, and Dr. Linda Lee has been one of I call her the queen of patient engagement in research. So thank you for that, really making sure that it is applicable and understandable for all people. However, there's one thing that we need to talk about. And it's a common assumption that if something is published in an academic journal, that it must be credible. Is this actually true?
Yeah. So sadly, it's not always true. There are lots of scientific journals out there. Some are better quality than others. So in arthritis field, some of the ones the audience may have heard of, like Arthritis in Rheumatology, Arthritis Care and Research, Journal of Rheumatology. I mean, those are the reputable journals that are very rigorous in their peer review process. But we also know that in the past, I would say 5-10 years, academic journal publication is becoming such a big industry that there are journals out there that will actually charge for publishing. And because it becomes a for-profit fee, that there are more and more journals that's being created, and some of those journals actually looks like they have an editorial board, looks like they have a peer review process, but when you dig into how well the peer review process is being done, it may not be as rigorous as some of the journals that I mentioned. So what it means is that some of the articles that's being published may not be as scientifically rigorous. There may be flaws in the study design. There may be flaws in the analysis, and there may be inaccuracy in terms of how the results being interpreted. So it is true that sometimes when you see a publication that looks like a scientific paper, the information is in there. It depending on the journal. It depends on what kind of peer review process it's gone through. That the information may or may not have some inaccuracies in there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think we're going to put a link in the show notes about how to identify what's called like a predatory journal. So these kind of fake sham journals. And one of the questions that I think is, or one of the tips that we found out before recording this is that look to see whether the results that you've seen in one study, have they been replicated with other research in other journals? Would you agree with that? Like that's maybe a helpful tip, because especially if you see something that's an outlier, you're like, I've never heard this before. And then you realize, oh, it was only this one study that was totally sponsored by somebody with a conflict of interest or something like that.
I love cross-referencing my information. So I found it very useful in the beginning of my diagnosis not to just look at the Canadian resources like Arthritis Research Canada, Arthritis Society, but I was also going to Versus Arthritis, or now Arthritis UK, and then going to the Arthritis Foundation to see, am I finding the right information? And a lot of time it matched. So that was very important to understand. And also in the show notes, I will put the blog post that I wrote with, I believe it's 10 or 12 reputable arthritis journals, including the 3 that Linda Lee mentioned. So I've done the heavy work on that one.
That's amazing. And this actually leads right into the next kind of misconception we've seen online, is that a misconception around science research in general is that if one study shows something works, then it's proven. That's it. One and done. Is that how science works? And if not, why?
Yeah, science is cumulative. It's like you don't build a high-rise building in one day. When we test ideas or test a new treatment, you get a smaller number of people who may have a better, that they meet the criteria of probably more likelihood of being responsive to the treatment if the treatment actually works. And so those type of smaller pilot type of project, oftentimes it may show you the spectacular results, right? Because it's more targeted to a certain group, a certain segment of people with the condition, and then with the smaller sample size and a highly controlled environment, it may work very well. But Cheryl, as you mentioned, these sort of studies they need to be replicated so that in a larger population, in a different setting, in a different environment, different disease status, that do they still work the same, or they work a little bit differently, or maybe there's no effect. So relying on the result of one breakthrough study, especially the ones that is earlier in the scientific inquiry with a smaller group of individuals, oftentimes they may show promise, but in terms of treatment decision making, it may be a good starting point to bring that to your healthcare provider and have a conversation and see how, this newer evidence can be incorporated into part of the treatment. Or maybe your healthcare provider may look at the body of evidence and say that it may be just a little bit too early to incorporate a new treatment that early in the research process. So I think part of it is to be careful when you see one single study that looks like it's a blockbuster. When you look at it, it's small, it is kind of early, and you never heard that someone did that before. Right.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And something related to this concept that we wanted to point out is this concept that I learned while getting my master's in occupational therapy, which is called cherry picking data, which is the phenomenon where you decide that you believe that there's a relationship between two variables. And instead of looking at the wealth of evidence, let's say 12, 15, 100 studies on this, you decide to just find and only look at the ones that prove what you want to be true. And that's really easy to do. And an example I just saw on social media, there was a great Susie Squats, a physical therapist, posted about weighted vests, in which the example was there is one study that did show that people who wore weighted vests and did a series of exercises with them showed better bone density. But guess what? When you dive into the details, those people also did high intensity strength training while wearing the vest. But what a lot of people on social media did was they extrapolated from those results. Oh, I just need to walk and wear this vest. And the people who sell the vests were like, this is great news. I can just slap this thing on the vest. These studies show that evidence shows there is a scientific peer-reviewed journal article, but the articles that actually are looking at the vest outside of the interval training strength training do not show a relationship between just the vest and the bone density. It's really the vest wasn't what pulled the lever on the effectiveness. It was the strength training. So that's a long way of saying that, but it's real. I have to say I've fallen into this before. There was even one, I'll give an example of myself, one quick one. I found one study that showed that the support groups didn't help people with their quality of life, which I had this mental, because I'm all about support groups. Now, the wealth of evidence does show that support groups help people. But I was like, I had this mental temptation to say, I'm not going to look at that. I don't want to look at that. Our minds, we don't want to look at contradictory evidence. So anyway, sorry, that was a long way of saying, what are your thoughts on cherry picking data, or how do you see that happening?
Yeah, that happens a lot especially in the arthritis context. And it's a dangerous thing to do. So the example you gave about what do you call that? The loader,
the weighted, we call them weighted vests.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good example. In arthritis, I mean, like as you were talking, I'm trying to think of example myself as well. And one of them is acupuncture, as another example. So Ivy mentioned that we did some work with the American College of Rheumatology guideline on exercise, lifestyle intervention, non-pharmacological intervention for managing rheumatoid arthritis. And one of the recommendation in acupuncture is that it's conditional recommendation. And part of it is because there are sort of the evidence for the effectiveness of acupuncture is mixed. Okay. So if you look at the studies in arthritis where acupuncture is used, it looks like it has some effect. However, if you group the studies where people did not know if they're actually getting acupuncture, the effect actually is not that spectacular. The effect in terms of dealing with pain is not statistically significant. But if you look at the studies where people actually knew whether they're getting acupuncture, so what we call blinding, so the person is not completely blinded to the intervention that they get, the result is more positive. So cherry picking example would be that someone who is promoting acupuncture as a treatment option would emphasize the results from the studies where people actually knew what kind of treatment that they were getting. So the more positive results in that group of studies. So part of it is that it overemphasizes what kind of effect that acupuncture can provide. And at the same time, we're ignoring some of the studies where it's actually better design, where people are not sure about which treatment they were given, whether they're getting acupuncture or not. So the important thing is that we need to look at all the studies that's being done in the use of acupuncture, using acupuncture as an example when you're making a recommendation. And therefore, the American College of Rheumatology give a conditional recommendation in acupuncture because the evidence quality is not in a tip-top shape.
I remember being part of that, and it was really eye-opening for some of the treatments, especially like chiropractor work, learning how that wasn't really recommended for people with rheumatoid arthritis and just learning about how the evidence wasn't there for some things. I thought it was really interesting how the evidence was so strong for exercise, though. And also, when we were speaking a little bit earlier about those weighted vests and how the ones that were doing the strength training were the ones that had better chance of not developing osteoarthritis or osteoporosis, I knew why because I've been following research, and that's because they've been strength training. So, very important to be following quality research so that you can even actually pick little details like that. But it can be kind of hard when you are on social media and there's people who are throwing different studies at you. I've heard some definitely wild things in my day, and they try and throw a study or a screenshot of a study, not even the full thing. So, what would be some ways that somebody who is looking at a study would be able to tell that they should be leaving the results from it, that it's a real reputable study? What are some red flags and some green flags?
Yeah, so to look for reputable or good scientific information, some of the reputable sources that we talked about earlier, like Arthritis Research Canada, Arthritis Foundation, and I know you mentioned that you put together a list where people can find reputable information and also written in plain language. That's important. I think part of it is to look for the information in in plain language summary in ways that you can understand. That will be helpful. And understanding and having a little bit of knowledge, understanding, so it's what we call the hierarchy of research evidence would be important as well. Some of the studies that are based on a design that, when you're testing a new treatment, for example, you also have what they call a control that you can compare with. So essentially, you have individuals who are otherwise the same in terms of their background, their health condition. You basically have people who meet a certain set of criteria, and then you randomly assign whether people getting the treatment itself or getting this inactive control or placebo sort of thing. So essentially, you're changing one thing, which is you get the treatment or you're not getting the treatment. So then we'll know at the end if the person improve, we'll know that, it is because of the one thing that's different, which is the treatment. So those sort of evidence tend to be the highest level of evidence because it shows causation. It's a cause effect. And some of the studies, they also good design, but they may not have the control environment. Some of the study that look at correlation, for example, they look at whether the existence of a specific type of treatment and an outcome that people would experience, whether they actually happened at the same time. So you're looking at the correlation of the two components. So it gives some idea of whether a specific intervention, specific treatment has potential to be useful in improving a certain type of outcome. But you're looking at correlation, and as people always say, correlation is not causation. They're not the same thing. So, so having a bit of understanding of the level of evidence that you're looking at can be useful in terms of understanding whether the information is high quality or is something that you may want to look a little bit more and see if there are high quality studies that can back up what you're seeing.
That makes a lot of sense. And you've already basically answered our next question, which is going to be like 3 practical things people can do who want to get better at understanding research. I think the only thing I would add to what you just said is make sure that what you're looking at is actually has been done in human studies, because I get people sending me a lot of articles and they're really excited, because they've seen a headline in the news, and the news a lot of times they want to report on things that sound even more exciting than they actually are. It's hilarious irony, right? Researchers are always hedging, like, these results suggest there may be a relationship, but further studies are needed. And then, but like, that's what the researcher says. And what the journalist hears is new perfect treatment that's going to cure arthritis. It's, whoa, we have two different styles of communication here. So a lot of times people will send me things like, look, they're going to cure RA. And it was like one study with one mouse where they like took the cells out and put them into a petri dish. And you're like, ooh, that is so far from applying, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that is so true. You also bring in a really good point that sometimes when you see social media, it's almost like you want to take a little pause and ask the question, is that an actual study or is it just a headline?
Yeah.
Social media are oftentimes oversimplify things. They cherry pick the results, like you said, and overstate conclusions. A simple rule that I would suggest is that the more extraordinary the claim, the stronger the evidence that you need to that you should expect to back it up. If you don't see that backup evidence to back up what the claim is, be very cautious about what you're looking at.
And I think both Eileen and I have gone through this before, where it almost can feel a little bit demoralizing at times when we try so hard to be evidence informed and evidence based. And then we'll see someone like, I don't know why it's always the tart cherry juice that gets to me, where there's this guy that on TikTok, he has over like 2 million views on this video about tart cherry juice, and everyone's so excited about it. And it makes me feel so bad it makes me feel sad for the misinformation. It also, I think as providers, that there's also, like for me as an occupational therapist, it's hard when I want there to be a quick fix. I want for myself as a patient and as an OT there to be a quick fix, but there's not. And it feels like I'm constantly in this position of dashing people's hopes. But what I try to do is say, look, like so that's my own existential crisis. But point being, it's unfortunately the thing that might feel the most hopeful to you as a patient, which is like someone telling you there's a simple fix or quick cure, is not usually what is long-term gonna work for people.
We have one question we always ask at the end, and it is, in one sentence, what is the most important takeaway you'd like someone to take from this episode?
Look for the most reputable resources and keep yourself informed. It will really add value to manage your arthritis.
I love that. And definitely go to the show notes to see more specific links if you want to start following some of these or going to these pages. If people want to connect with you or learn more, where do you recommend that they go?
Well, my office is at Arthritis Research Canada, so
Perfect.
you can always find me there, and I will leave you a link for the listeners to reach me.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Amazing. And thank you again for listening to another episode of Rumor Has It.
And don't forget to check out the full show notes on the Arthritis Life website, myarthritislife.net, for a full transcript plus video of our conversations.
We would also love to hear what you think about this episode. Shoot us an email or comment on social media.
All right. Thanks again, Linda and Dr. Lee, and bye-bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. This podcast is supported by Room to Thrive, an educational program I created to help empower you to live life to the fullest with rheumatic disease. In the program, you're going to learn evidence-based tools for managing all the ways rheumatic disease affects your life. And my goal is to help you go from overwhelmed to confident, supported, and connected in a matter of weeks. You can go through the pre-recorded modules on your own in the self-paced course, or you can take the course along with a robust support group of new arthritis friends to support you and cheerlead you along the way. Learn more in the link in my show notes, or you can always go to www.myarthritislife.net. And if you like this podcast, I'd be so honored if you took the time to rate and review it. I also encourage you to share it with anyone you know who might benefit from it. I also want to remind you that you can find full transcripts, videos, and detailed show notes with hyperlinks for each episode on the Arthritis Life website, plus full episode videos on the Arthritis Life YouTube channel. If you have any ideas for content for future episodes, or you want to share your story on the podcast, please send me, Cheryl, an email at info@myarthritislife.net. I can't wait to hear from you, and thanks so much again for your time.